Hello, and welcome to the Market Bull podcast. Please note, topics and stocks discussed in this podcast are not financial or investment advice. Today on the show, I spoke with David DeTata, the Managing Director of Strategic Energy Resources, which is listed on the ASX under code SER. Strategic Energy Resources is a specialised undercover mineral explorer and project generator focused on discovery in the greenfield frontiers of Australia. David discussed SER's evolution and the adjustments the company has made since he joined the team. SER recently signed an agreement with mining giant Fortescue Metals to develop the Kenobi project, which David discussed in detail. David also elaborated on how SER develops the range of projects it has in its portfolio. I hope you enjoy listening. So hello, I'm Ben Kostrich and this is the Market Bull podcast. Joining me today on the show, I caught up with him quite a few months ago, but I finally get to sit down with him, is David DeTata, the Managing Director of Strategic Energy Resources under code SER. There's been a lot of activity over the past 6 months or even since I first met him, but welcome to the show, David.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
So we were saying before we started, your first time on a podcast, so hopefully it's an enjoyable experience for you. But diving into yourself, you've been at SER since 2017, and you've been there for quite a few years now, and you're the managing director, and there's been a lot of changes and progressions with the company since you've been there. But before we go into that, what's your backstory and history, and how did you get immersed in the mining and exploration scene of Australia?
I have nothing, my background's actually nothing to do with exploration. My background is actually in chemistry, and my first career was actually as a forensic scientist. So with a love of chemistry and law, I studied at university and found my first job as a forensic scientist. And it wasn't long before I turned an interest into a research interest and began to delve deep into areas of analytical chemistry, which led me to writing up significant bodies of research in an office in West Perth. And as everyone knows, West Perth is the home of any number of exploration companies and mining companies. So I began to talk back and forth with different groups in different companies. They saw the skill set that I had. Everyone was looking for alternative angles, alternative ways to leverage the market. And at that time, everyone was looking at other things. Cannabis was quite big at that time. There was biotech, a whole range of battery technologies we're looking at. And my background in science, in particular analytical chemistry and the research angle, was enough to tempt an ASX company at the time to take me on board, do some initial consulting role for them, and that burdened into a role with an exploration company around 2017.
Okay, so, and I mean, with this being almost a unexpected arrival into this seat, I mean, naturally upskilling and learning a lot about this, did you see that there were any similarities with what you'd previously done and then venturing into this space as well, or?
Certainly, I see exploration in particular from a project level as a research project. You develop a theory on where a ground might be prospective, and then you undertake a scientific, methodical approach and understanding what actually might be possible, and then testing those theories and refining them as you move through the exploration cycle. So there's a lot of overlap from research in other areas, and I found that in analytical chemistry, and translating that across to in exploration field. So it's actually, in my view, we have a list of projects, but we also have a list of research opportunities in front of us, in front of SER, and we're working through each of those methodically and continually refining our method as we move in that scientific approach. Interesting,
because the business model, you could say, is slightly different to what other players in this field are doing. So if you're trying to describe SER to everyday investors or just anyone looking to understand what the company is about and its ethos, how do you describe SER to people?
Tagline, SER, Specialist Undercover Explorer and Project Generator. And this gets back to the strategy of the company. So around 2019, when I joined SER, I sat down with the then managing director, Stuart Rector, and we decided to play a different game from what a typical junior exploration company would play. We decided to start looking where juniors fear to tread, and that's undercover exploration. So in using a way of therefore identifying areas that are prospective for large-scale deposits or large-scale mineralisation, undercover at depth, but then benchmarking that or at least tying that back to a known mineral deposit. So our flagship project, the Kenobi project, a couple hundred kilometres north of Ernest Henry, is the best example of exactly that approach that we're using. We've taken the faults and the controlling structures that host Ernest Henry, and we've projected those as they head undercover further away in that exploration space where actually no one's playing. It is expensive and it is unaccustomed to a junior. We can then take a large land holding and then, using that scientific approach, refine our understanding, knowing that there is a controlling structure that hosts mineralisation to the south, and start to understand what's happening at depth. And that way we can open up more exploration space for ourselves. We can take larger land holdings, but we also recognise that there's a risk inherently with large projects, especially undercover, and they're expensive. But we know that there's a potential there to host mineralisation, and what comes with that is being able to allure a major in, and that's where we've had some success in the past couple of months in securing a joint venture with Fortescue. So we've been able to actually bring in a major under the same guys that we're there, the discovery of a tier 1 exploration project, and use their funding to help us test those targets and develop that theory.
Because that's the interesting point that I see a lot of what SER is about, discovering those almost untapped areas that have been, I guess, neglected because either advances in technology weren't there, or there was just some reason behind not exploring it. And now, as we're realizing across the globe, the levels, the top and the best stuff is naturally being taken or mined, and now it's a little bit more difficult and you have to look a little bit deeper. So going into the uncover or the undercover sort of terminology, I mean, if you're phrasing that for someone that hasn't been out and even seen these areas, what does that really mean? There's just a lot of obstacles in the way, or is it just deeper than anticipated, or describing that to people?
I think the best way to look at it is there's no outcrop, so there's nothing at the surface that would suggest that there's something deep undercover. And when a typical target is 400-500 metres, so it is deep, and that's where we're relying on alternative methods of understanding what's happening at depth, building that picture of what's happening at depth, and that's where geophysics for us is a key to understanding what's happening at depth. But reflecting back on why we've targeted these regions, those deposits at surface are rare and few, and there will be less of them because they're easy to explore. Kicking over a deposit doesn't happen anymore, and it won't. So we have to go deeper, and that's more costly and more expensive. And we've taken the approach back in 2019 that for us there's less competition there, but there's more of a chance that the next party that comes along and sees potential in our project is going to be a company that can then take that to the step of actually moving into development. So if we look at the processing techniques and the way for us to understand what's at depth, the geophysics behind it, if you take the understanding that if you're sensing something at surface that is 500 metres at depth, and you're getting as best picture, as clear a picture of what might be there based on a range of techniques, when you then finally do drill the target, the size of the target is significant. So we're using geophysics as our targeting rationale to try and guide the drill bit, but because of the depths and the limitations associated, we're not going to try for something small. We're going to try for something big.
Yeah.
And that's where we're able to attract, obviously, a major to come in particular in Kenobi, because they see the allure of seeing something big at depth. Because if it's big and it's big enough to put $500,000-$600,000 behind it to put a drill rig through the middle of it, then the next logical step, well, if it's mineralised, then it has to be significant.
Yeah.
The percentages again, and how much is there in grade come into it as well, obviously. But you're not hitting small targets, you're only hitting large targets at depth.
And that's that combination of, as you pointed to, quite expensive to do it, but naturally having these areas, but enticing a bigger player that's got naturally the bigger checkbook and ability of already having a proven resource. But as we know, they have to continuously find other areas to add to their portfolio. And that, as you said, encourages them to go with a group like SER to then uncover and potentially sort of do that joint venture to understand if there is something there they can then execute it and build it along the way. So the joint venture with the Fortescue has been a milestone, because they arguably last financial year in Australia, so just recently gone. I mean, that would have taken a fair amount of work and almost negotiations to get there. So if you're highlighting that whole process of how you got to go to the market and say, hey, we've got this joint venture with Fortescue, which everyone knows that brand, it's a great announcement, but then to understand all the dealings behind and how it's even led up to that position. I mean, what was involved from the team and yourself's point of view to get that, and even getting them on board to decide that, hey, we want to partner with you guys to explore this?
Well, the original tenement holding that SER held was a high-grade gold, small tenement package out in Kenobi, and that was 2016 when we picked that up. We then followed that up with some infill drilling for gold and found some greater high gold intercepts, again at depth. But in 2016, 2017, the market didn't really understand the depth that we're playing with. And if it was on the Gawler Cratton, it wouldn't be a problem because those sort of depths, even 500-600 metres, are routine. But out in northwest Queensland, where everyone looks to surface expression and surface outcrop, it's really a challenge for other companies to get their head around. So in 2021, we were very fortunate to get some government funding to assist. And what's been great is when you start looking at projects that are a bit crazy, a little bit further out, a bit deeper, in order to pick up the projects, you're relying on government data. And so when you put a proposal together to government to say, we're going to go out and test one of these targets, you're likely to secure funding. So in 2021, we went out there, drilled, we found some a high 132 metre intersection of 0.1 nickel. So the tenor's not there, but there's definitely nickel in a region where people wouldn't really associate nickel out in northwest Queensland. And that's about the time we started coming to the attention of majors in the region, and conversely 150 k's north west of the project is another project we have, Isa North, and that was started to become surrounded by Fortescue and Rio Tinto, and Anglo American out that way. So we all know that the majors are heading out that way in Queensland in particular. That's where we started talking back and forth with Fortescue about the project, and it really taken upwards of a year for them to get comfortable with the project, get comfortable with us as a small company dealing with us, negotiating a contract, an agreement, and then understanding that if you want to move these things quickly, you really need us to operate, because we have the agreements, we have the ability to get on ground and make things happen quite quickly. So from a market's perspective, since the start of the year, we've looked very quiet, but beneath the surface, these sort of discussions and negotiations have been back and forth to get to that point finally in the middle of the year when we could announce something, knowing that the moment we did announce, we had everything lined up and we could then get on the ground and drilling. So if you look back at how long it takes to get a greenfields project from, in our case, pegging it in our own right to actually being able to drill it, you're waiting for 6 months application, you're waiting for another 12 months of landholder engagement. There's 2-3 years before you can actually get on ground and do something. Fortescue bypassed all that and got us right at the point where we had co-funding to drill a hole this year, regardless of whether we had a joint venture partner in the room that walked in at the right time and right time for both parties. So that's kind of the drilling program that we're going to look forward to in the next 6 months.
Yeah, well, that's the timing is everything, but it's almost people get lost in the idea that you read an announcement or you hear a great drilling result and it's just happened overnight, or it's just this week they've got these results, but it's been this continuous and probably time-consuming and arduous process of getting to that stage to even present it to the market. And then given that there's a lot of activity out there, it's then cutting through it. And I mean, that's where when I was first introduced to you, it was a different way of operating within a space where you just assume that you've got your land, you explore it, but this is slightly different given the vast project. So, I mean, if you're looking at all your projects that you've got lined up or all your potential areas, I mean, naturally there is a lot of different priorities and ways to go about developing them all, and the joint ventures I would assume are the hierarchy or the priorities. But if you're going through the list of what you guys have access to and what you're developing, can you run us through what that entails?
In terms of projects, our greenfield projects, a flagship project that was Kenobi, case north of Cloncurry. There we're chasing Ernest Henry style magnetite IOCG deposits. So that'll be the focus of the drilling that's coming towards in the next couple of months. Fortescue have worked hard in developing targets and landing them in front of us and saying this is where the drill rig needs to go, as well as following up that magmatic nickel target that was based on the government funding we had a couple of years ago. So that's our flagship project, but we also have our Isa North project, which I've already mentioned, about 150 k's northwest of our Kenobi project. And again, using that same rationale of find a deposit, in this case, the gunpowder fault or 29 metals have got a number of copper deposits there. Following that fault north, undercover, things get deeper. That's where we picked up Isa North. We're going to head there straight after our drilling at Kenobi. So we have 2 greenfields projects, one fully funded for the next 6 years, assuming Fortescue stay in the game, and the other project where we're looking to move it from the geophysics stage into doing our own independent drilling on that. It's 100% SER. It's surrounded by majors, so who knows what happens with that area. And then we have another couple of projects which we're just starting, so that pipeline continues. But as I said, it takes 2 to 3 years before we can get to that stage. So we have another couple of projects that we're working on, and one we've just recently secured that we'll announce to the market when it moves to the next stage. But they're the main two. That's the main focus of this year, and we think that with the 3 IOCG targets plus the nickel target at Kenobi will see us get through to the end of the field season with the eyes north as well on that, and then next year we reassess the results, reload, geophysics starts again, and drill again. This year we had proposed on just doing the one drill hole at Kenobi, possibly with another follow-up, but with our major coming in and funding the program, we really want to get as much drilling as possible to understand what's happening and push that along.
And you mentioned it before about even getting to this point and again accessing capital and raising, and the point about pitching it to government and going through almost historical drilling, and you highlighted that before. But I mean, even accumulating all that information and presenting it, and clearly it's a process that you're going to continuously repeat across all your projects and all of them at different lengths. But I mean, if you're going back to the Kenobi project and just building that, I mean, how are you sourcing, and what sort of information really got you to where it is now, where it's in the joint venture stage with Fortescue?
Well, the original drill hole was enough for us to have confidence that it was worth following up. Again, we didn't get the market traction from it because the gold intercepts at depth were great, but not outstanding.
Yeah,
it was a small project. So from there we went back to government data sets, geophysics again, and that's where our technical excellence and science-driven sort of exploration focus comes in. It wasn't uncommon for us to have three different geophysicists on call with our exploration team, working through these projects, working through targets, developing an understanding and a picture of what's happening at depth as best as we could. And out this way, out the Kenobi way, there are a dozen targets that are worth putting drill holes into, but you have to understand the modelling and the vagaries and subtleties associated with different forms of geophysics, and then be able to present that in a way that a new company might want to come in and have a look at what you've actually been doing in the last couple of years across that project. So for us, we lean on a number of consultants, geophysicists in particular, that allow us to paint that picture of what's happening at depth, and collaborating with industry experts. For instance, once we drilled the nickel intercept in 2021, we leaned on Steve Beresford, who a known magmatic nickel expert, and brought him in as a consultant to help us understand and really pitch to us what the potential of our project could be, and then bring him into the tent and get him to help us to then communicate that story to those people that are interested in the project as well. So for us, bringing as many different science specialists in different areas, collaborating with them, working with them in the full confidence that if they don't understand the project, then we don't understand it, but we need to then communicate that to a JV partner.
And I mean, this will be an interesting point. I haven't done it on the show before, but talking about geophysics and this side of, I guess, surveying and analysing it, describing that to people. And I mean, if we're, again, podcasting, people can't necessarily see it, but how do you describe that process in a way that people understand? Because there's so many different drilling techniques and ways of analysing soil, but this is slightly different to, well, I mean, I think a lot of other companies still do it, but this is clearly one of the unique points of how SER's differentiating itself in its technique. So what is it? And then are there any others that you're using as well?
So broadly, because we're explorating in depth, there's no outcrop, there's no rocks that point out of the ground that you can kick, there's no soil sampling you can do, because you are looking at 500 metres plus of cover. So geophysics is just a discipline of science where you're measuring the properties of the earth. So a body, for instance, that we're chasing Kenobi IOCG, it's going to be magnetic. So that's one property that we can look at. So we use magnetics as a form of geophysics that is done at surface, because we want to look for something that's magnetic but at depth but big, and then it'll be dense, so we'll have gravity, and so we use gravity as a form of geophysics. Then we can model those two together, and we can use other the conductivity of a property. For instance, if it's a conductive property of a metal at deep underground, then we can use that and model that in. And it's just a way of taking different data sets from the properties that we would expect of a dense body that has magnetite in it, similar to what's happening at Ernest Henry, and modelling that up in 2D and 3D spaces, getting a picture of what might be present below the surface. Answers. And in the end, we found the benefit in bringing all of those consultants that we've used in the same space and getting them to thrash out the ideas, knowing that we're the ones going to have to be paid for the drill hole to determine the idea where to put it first of all, and then to try and best efforts at intersecting something. So for us, we lean on geophysics that's our starting point.
Yeah.
With this regional data generating mode where we start to pick up projects, or then in refining mode, and then obviously the drilling we then take and see how that correlates back to the geophysics, feed that back into the model, and keep going. I'm sure it's used more widely than you would have made it out to be. For us, that's our go. That's where we have to start, because we are looking for areas there is no surface drilling.
No, yeah, exactly. Yeah, I can't imagine it's necessarily an uncommon term, but I've never really gone into the depths of how and what it actually is, because it's very easy to read these terms and then necessarily just not even bother to understand what it all encapsulates and what it all means. And I mean, that's the other point there of, you've got this amazing area or with no outcroppings, and then you've got to decide where to target. And given that the two projects are further along than the others, I mean, that will be the next process for the other ones, is figuring it out and sort of zoning in on a particular area. But I mean, that clearly is something that, it takes a lot of time and information and just pulling it all together to then decide what's a drilling target. And then when you've got all that, I mean, walking through the process of getting like a drill rig there, for example, or even getting the processes and everything organized. I mean, what's like that, given the infrastructure or accessibility? I mean, what runs through your head trying to help organize that, all these stages of getting to drilling?
The remoteness. For a while, one of our first projects that we took up in this greenfields approach was in the area between Tennant Creek and Mount Isa, off the Barker Highway, and the remoteness is a large impost for a lot of companies. Even just getting access to site, and then it might be off a main highway, but it might be 3 kilometres through a track that's never been, that hasn't been frequently used, or you need to push a track in. So the challenge with greenfields exploration is getting those services out to where they need to be. And then it's not just for any geophysics program that might need to go across the ground, but it's then clearance tracks that you need to put a drill rig in, and that's native title surveys, and ensuring that the landholder is aware of what you're doing and operating on a station quite literally in the back of nowhere. Those logistical issues become quite significant. And then any service that you want to bring to the actual site comes with its own demob and remob costs associated with that. So one of the reasons why our East Tennant project, which we managed to sell just recently to Middle Island, one of the reasons for us moving away from that project and focusing on Queensland is the remoteness and the cost. We found that the area is highly prospective, but when you're one of a number of players in that region trying to, one, attract capital, but then two, have a base to work from, and then progress all your tenements at a pace that keeps up with minimum expenditure, it just became too expensive for us. So we had to rationalise, and that was one of the things we did to rationalise that. But in talking about Kenobi and Isa North projects, they are close to Conglari and Mount Isa, which makes it a lot easier. We'll have a single base there when we start drilling this year, but even still, it's a couple of days to get there, or a couple of days to complete tracks in earthworks, and then you have to get the rigs out there, and then you want to decide, well, when the core comes out of the ground, what are you going to do with it? Where are you going to do it? So for remoteness is something to contend with.
Yeah, well, and that's the whole concept of greenfield exploration, isn't it? Is that it's areas that necessarily haven't been uncovered, or that they're a little bit more challenging, and that it's green. Like it's endless opportunities in a way, but also there's countless other obstacles to get there.
That's right, and if it was easy, you'd have lots of competition. But we think the prize is worth chasing, and that's why we think these search spaces are. I think that's where the next discovery has to be. They have to be where no one's looked, or where conventional wisdom has decided that it's not prospective. But looking back at the geophysics, there is a blob there. There is an anomaly. There is something undercover that's different, and maybe that's where the next discovery is. So why would you write it off on the basis that 20 years ago someone's looked at it and said, no, we don't think there's anything out that way?
Exactly, and that ties into these big players now, that all the easier accessible, probably not back then, but a lot of that area and those regions that were more common have been explored, and you're finding these mine lives are progressively coming towards the end, which means that if they've got 10 years to go, if their life expectancy, or 15, it means you've really got to already start finding the next one and getting that up to speed to take over. And given the looming pressures on a whole host of different commodities, there's really this emphasis to find the next big area, and it's not going to be, as you said, traditional exploration side of it, which I can see Fortescue jumping on board. That's an appeal for them, given that you guys are doing a lot of the hard work to get there, and they can come in with the checkbook and help elevate that project to the next level, which I can imagine is quite rewarding having that come through, and a lot of work. And then of course there's more to go. But one of the points we didn't highlight, or you've mentioned it briefly, but with these projects, I mean, what are the ideal, or what are you hoping to find, or what have the previous results shown? Is it nickel, or what commodities are highlighted there? Because that ties into, as we know, what the outlook is for that certain commodity going forward.
Yeah, with the Kenobi project, for a while there was a high-grade gold, as I mentioned when we first started, and then the intercept of nickel in 21 really changed our focus, and we thought this magnetic nickel, this is real. There's nickel there, and we should pursue it. And we got a follow-up grant to go and do it. But Fortescue are chasing copper. They're chasing Ernst Henry IOCG style deposits, and that's exactly why they've JV'd into the project, and why they're set some compelling targets in front of us to go and drill. So it is a copper target, and that area that we've got is prospective. As I said, we've generated our own number of targets, 20 targets, that plus 20 plus targets that we would have liked to have drilled, but the budget for us doesn't extend that far.
Yeah,
it would have extended to a nice follow-up drill hole this year, and I think we would have then sat back and tried to again attempt someone else to come along and do it. But copper's the focus there. Isa North, again, that project, IOCG country, that's what everyone's after.
Yeah.
At depth again, but there is copper deposits to the south of that, again, as I've said. So that's the hope for us, is that we can large some copper follow-ups and possibly some nickel. But the targeting strategy, the rationale behind what we've done from geophysics perspective to targeting nickel is different to what Fortescue are doing for IOCG. But the fact that there's two sets of targets, and they've committed to drilling the nickel target first and then following with the IOCG, means that there is the potential for both.
Yeah.
We've come to that conclusion independently, and they have too, and we've sat down together as a joint exploration committee and worked through that, and we think there's reasons to drill for both targets.
And again, that's a testament to the discussions and all the work that goes into getting to signing that paper. And I can imagine there's been a lot of people involved, or currently still involved in the team, and I always like to swing the conversation back to understand who's actually a part of it and what they've done. So with yourself on the board and the other people involved in key leadership positions, or even down to the geophysics and the geophysicists and people that are out on the ground, I mean, who's a part of the SER team?
So the executive chairman is Stuart Reckner, and he's an exploration geologist. He actually was involved in the first company that I started with quite some number of years ago, on the board of that one, and history in developing projects, taking them from greenfield projects or picking ground and then working them through, and currently sits on as a non-executive director of Kingston Resources, which is actually a developer. So they're pouring gold bars there, so experience ranges all the way from picking ground right through to being involved in production. So as I mentioned before, Stuart and I sat down and we wanted to do something different with this company. We wanted to stand out and have a strategy that sets ourselves apart from a company that might be looking to commodities depending on what the cycle is, or near-term projects. And one thing we were destined on is, firm on, is that we can generate our own quality projects. So we don't take the opportunity to buy other projects. We tend to generate them on our own. And I think the success of FMG coming along is our final proof point that we can take something from nothing and get to that point. And sitting on board is Ant McIntosh, and Ant's involved in a number of exploration and technology related companies. He was on the board of Echo Resources when I was bought out by Northern Star in 2019. So he's got experiences in that corporate broking side of things, and it's been between Stuart and Ant and myself. We've all sat through the conversations around board tables about, well, what happens if we get to that point when we talk to a major, and then what happens, and then working through that decision tree of these are the steps we need to take, and getting input at that point. And I think we've got to a great conclusion with Kenobi, and we've all at board level got the skills to be able to make sure that we can then replicate that and build it to the next one. One thing I suppose we haven't mentioned is we sat on our hands, as I've said, while we've waited for this transaction to happen since pretty much the start of the year. One thing the board was quite strong on was ensuring that our current shareholders were rewarded in some way, and we're able to introduce new shareholders. For us to repeat the process of getting the next JV or hopefully do some next round of drilling, we really need enough funds. It's great to have a JV partner, but you still need cash in the bank. Greenfield exploration is expensive, but it's also drawn out. It's not quick. So we decided to package the announcement up with the capital raise. We got Bill Potter involved in that, and they were fantastic in introducing us to new shareholders. and also in publicising the strategy of the company. Being able to say these guys have taken this project from greenfields, they're now got a major involved. The next strategy is getting the next one involved, and part of the reward, I suppose, for existing shareholders is they got to come in before we announced to the market, before it went possibly the share price went up, and then we tried for a capital raise because we needed to replenish funds to be able to reload for the next one. So that was the strategy in doing that, and why we timed it. And we hope that those shareholders that have come in and our existing shareholders will see some of the rewards from the drilling program, which is imminent next month, or August this month, and through to the end of the year.
Well, it's a key there about the idea of rewarding shareholders, and given that a lot of what's transpired over the last few years has been difficult, not only for companies but for people, and just access to capital has been a little bit harder. But as we're seeing now, there's this looming ability that it's not easy, but there's a few more people that are willing to get back into these whole range of exploration companies, or even across all sectors of markets. But one of the exciting points, is this looming joint venture, these big companies that know they need to replenish. We're seeing it in lithium, we're seeing it in copper, we're seeing it everywhere, which really highlights that a lot of these companies have these deadlines and these commodity targets to reach, and they don't think that they're going to get there given the resources they've got, which means that greenfield exploration and these smaller players that are doing the harder yards but can't necessarily develop it into a huge mine, they need the assistance and the help. And that's where, as you said, you've proven the incubator model of finding something, building it up, and then getting a big fish really in Fortescue to come and help elevate it to the next level, which is really exciting. And I can imagine it's continuously stressful, and there's always things happening and developing. But for listeners that want to know what's happening, or what are your plans for the next really 12 months, and what investors and just people following the markets expect coming out of SER?
Plenty of drill results. Put succinctly, as I said, there's 4 targets that need drilling, and we have one hand at our back pushing us through those, and then we hit our own targets post that. So by the time that's all finished and wrapped up, we quickly find ourselves into the new year, and that's when the generation of targets for next year's drilling. As I said, the Fortescue announcements set us up for 6 years of drilling. They've defined these targets in year 1 targets, year 2, and we plough through those. And in the background, we work at as a North project, progress that, and hopefully talk to enough majors in and around us that might be interested in being involved in that. I mean, in the back of our mind, this is an ongoing generative process, and we find our next one, and as I said, we alluded to already, we've started looking for our next generation of projects and stuff. But if you're looking how far down the path we'd like to go, it'd be great to have a war chest to be able to take it to not just the first step, but the second, third step, where we can get to the point where the company's big enough, because we've proven, and our exploration in other projects is paid for, that we can then add more value to it, so that when we have these discussions, we're not a $5 million market cap company having a discussion with a $50 billion company. We have more on our side, and we can stay in the game a lot longer and prove up the resource, or prove up the drilling results a bit further. So that's the ultimate aim of the company, and I think that having FMG on board in this one de-risks us. I mean, the process of onboarding for us wasn't easy, and it wasn't quick. There's certainly risks associated with dealing with a junior. So we think we've ticked all that box, and that there's no secrets. We're now de-risked to that point, so it might be easier for the next one, but ultimately, we'd like to develop our own project to that next point, so we look a lot easier to negotiate, rather than negotiating for a point where we were there. We're a lot smaller.
Well, I hope other people have told you, but it's almost like the David versus the Goliath when you say SEI and Fortescue sort of combining, and it's not the battle, it's this synergy, which you'd almost say is uncharacteristic given the size, but it's again a testament to what's been working. So for listeners that want to learn more about SER, where can they go, and what can they find out, and how can they potentially contact you as well and ask questions if they're interested?
Well, the easiest way is to head to the website, and then you'll find my contact details on there, as well as all the announcements are clearly visible and being able to be contacted. We'll have a number of announcements coming out as we head towards the point of drilling, and then when we start drilling, we're trying to feed the market with as much information as possible. We are in a position, though, where in dealing with a JV partner, there is a level of respect that we have to pay in dealing with those, and what we can and can't say as part of the project itself. But those avenues are there to contact me directly, and we can have a discussion about the company and where we're going forward.
No, awesome. No, thank you, David. It's as I said, when we first met, there's been a lot happening, and I'm glad I got to sit down with you and pick your brain about SER, because there's a lot of activity happening and guaranteeing a lot more to continue. So yeah, thank you for speaking on the show today, and I look forward to seeing how SER progresses and updates and what hits the market in the coming 6 to 12 months and onwards. So thank you again.
Great, thanks for the opportunity. Hope we can do it again.
Thanks for listening to the Market Bull podcast. If you enjoyed it, please make sure to like and subscribe. You can follow the Market Bull on our socials at Twitter and LinkedIn by searching The Market Bull. You can also subscribe to our newsletter on the website by visiting www.themarketbull.com.au.